What's up, everyone? It's your boy Norman Radd89 here, bringing you another video, and today I'm going to be tackling some vampire reviews. I've been recently deep diving, going down the rabbit hole of watching a lot of vampire films, prepping myself for a top 10 vampire list. Of course, I have my favorites already, but I wanted to deep dive into some I haven't seen, and also going into foreign films, because the way that people overseas they portray vampires is completely different from over here in America. So this one today, for what we're talking about, is a French erotic vampire film from 1972 called Requiem for a Vampire. So let's get into this one. Roll it. So Requiem for a Vampire is directed by Jean Roland, who's famous for doing a lot of kind of erotic French films, and a lot of them centered around vampires. Another one is Shivers of a Vampire, but like I said, today we're talking about Requiem for a Vampire, which is a very interesting film, quite a ride, and one that I kind of want to describe. I'm gonna spoil some moments, but this is a film that I gotta spoil some moments just to kind of sell you on it, to tell you why I enjoyed the ride on this one. But we follow two young women who are on the run at the beginning. They're dressed as clowns. Don't tell me why, but they're on a shootout. It's a car chase, and it happens from a dead stop, which always it's very interesting. It's a dead stop. These cars start driving, and it's a complete car chase with a shootout. Very interesting. Two girls dressed as clowns. There's a driver, a male driver, but he ends up getting shot, and the two girls escape, and they're on the run, and they end up coming across a very creepy castle, and in that castle they find out that it's run by a vampire couple. So right there, that setup is kind of crazy. It's interesting, and being a French film, there is subtitles, but what's cool about this film is it's very limited dialogue. There really isn't a lot of dialogue. We go through the first about like 18 to 20 minutes of this film with only one line of dialogue, and I think it's quite fascinating. And for me, the positive that I love, one key positive, is the music. The soundtrack is awesome. It doesn't really fit the film, but for French films, you got to understand, when you're going to foreign films, if you're not used to them because you typically watch films from America or the Western countries, when you watch French films, they're completely different in the tone and the style that they try to portray on screen. So the music in here, the soundtrack, is like a lot of snare drums and like flutes and stuff, very reminiscent of some of the Fargo soundtracks if you watch the Fargo TV show. So it's very reminiscent of that, and it kind of feels almost even like Tom and Jerry, the music soundtracks that you would hear for characters that don't talk, because like I said, there's not a lot of dialogue in this film. So a very interesting style that they chose to do with the film, but I do love the score and the soundtrack. Another thing is positive, but it's kind of a mix and negative, is this is a very sleazy film. If you love beautiful French women, they're in here aplenty. There's a lot of beautiful French women, and they're running around amok, luring men in and biting them and stuff, but there's also a bunch of sex scenes in this film. And of course, these females, because they're French, they got underarm hair, but you don't mind. They got bush. It's the 70s. I don't mind me some bush, so that doesn't mind. I don't have no problem with that. It's just there is an abundance of these scenes. This is a film that spends about 30 seconds on story, and then the majority of the film is all erotic sexploitation stuff with vampires. So obviously the French people, they view vampires as a very sexy thing. For me, as a horror fan, I've always viewed horror like this, like sex and horror are like two sides of the same coin, because that could be a very scary thing. And the way, the way they portray it in this film is very erotic. Like, the vampires lure people in, and that's how they get them and stuff, using these young, beautiful women to lure in their victims and stuff. We have a lead vampire who's a very old vampire that's been around for centuries, and then he kind of has these levels of different people that help him out in the coven, and there's also lady vampires that help him out, and they torture a lot of women too in this film. It's very crazy. Whoever filmed this film, like I said, Jean Roland, he definitely has, I want to say, a little bit of a, BDSM fetish kind of thing going on, but this film is out there bonkers because of the tonal shifts, but also, like I said, the soundtrack, the music, the characters, but it has a style. It's definitely a film that does style over substance, which I could understand that. At least I had fun. It wasn't a bad film. It's not an awful film, but it's not a great film either. But like I said, I at least had fun because of the style and what they put on screen. It does sometimes feel like they just decided to do things to do things. Main kind of crux and hook for the story that really drives it as our lead characters are the two young girls who escaped, where they become members of this coven and they're using these girls to lure men in. One of them actually is, more inclined to join the coven and wants to help out. And another one ends up kind of falling for this guy and doesn't really want that life. They don't, like I said, focus on that story at all. It's kind of just a drop line. It's literally like a 10-12 second drop line between these girls, where like one's like, I'm in for this, the other one's like, I'm not in for this. And so they don't focus on the character depth that much, but yeah, one of them kind of falls in love with the guy, so she's trying to get this guy Frederick out, and that becomes a problem because he's obviously, they hook up, of course, in this film, like I said, and he's wickedly good at the skills that he has at going downstairs, and that's why he wins her over. So yes, this is a wild film for sure, and one that I highly recommend you at least watch once, because there is some payoff when you get to the third act, and when you get to the third act, there's some, like I said, story beats that happen, and I feel like the older vampire comes into play. I wish that we had, like I said, in terms of main negatives for this film, less sex scenes. Don't get me wrong, I love beautiful women, and I think sex scenes are cool, don't get me wrong, in your films, and I understand this is an erotic sexploitation film, but you could have trimmed a couple of them out of here and focused some on the older vampire, and then in the third act, the kind of not twist reveal, but the character arc that we have for that person, it would have hit home even more. So that's what I mean. This is a film that had a lot of potential, but it's pretty cool because, like I said, it's interesting to watch and see how the French people portray vampires. So for me, in my book, NordRadd89, right here, I'm going to give you Requiem for a Vampire. The Radd rating for this one's going to be a 7 out of 10, and it mainly gets that 7 and a high rating like that is because it's very creative. There is some style in here, and the stylistic choices they chose, I enjoyed. I like the soundtrack. I think some of the awkward stuff where the girls running away when they're in the car chase scene and they're dressed like clowns, like it kind of doesn't make any sense. But it's cool and it's funny and interesting. And then when we actually get the storyline later that they were on the run because they killed someone, it's literally like a 15-second story drop line, and we don't hear why they killed someone, who's looking for them, Like I said, this is a mixed bag. This is a film that's a mixed bag, but I highly recommend it. It's currently streaming on Shudder, Requiem for a Vampire. Go check it out. And there's going to be some more vampire videos coming on the channel too. I'm going to be doing some Radd reviews, like Radd movie reviews for some specific vampire films that I watched throughout this journey. But then eventually we're going to be doing a top 10 list so you can see my absolute favorites. Maybe a couple honorable mentions I'll have in that video as well. Like the video, that definitely helps out the channel. Share, subscribe, all that jazz. I greatly appreciate it. But most importantly, I want y'all to have a safe and happy day. Peace out.